بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the Tariqa al-Muhammadiyya, from the section on beliefs, we have been looking at some of the final investigations related to beliefs, and these are on the matters that what are called the transmitted beliefs, and this includes some of the furu' al-iman. And the purpose of the ulama cautioning against certain things being kufr, etc., is not simply to say, okay, this is where the boundary is, but to keep people away from those limits. And we have to also keep in mind that in the context of lands where Ahl Sunnah is established and people have mainstream beliefs, the educational system is the maktabs and the madaris, right? So what predominates is mainstream understanding, particularly in towns and cities. Then the purpose of warning against wrong beliefs is also to keep the common person's belief and understanding sound. It is not meant to be out of fatwa. So, we're going to see a number of issues here from the Tatarkhaniya, but we can mention 5 principles, right? Firstly, that the dhabitul kufr, right? The criteria for kufr is what? Is at-takdhib, right? It's denial, right? التكذيب لما جاء به النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, right? It's to deny what the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم came with. That's the first thing, right? Kufr is also simply non-belief. عدم الإيمان عمن من شأنه أن يكون مؤمنا. It's not believing from one who has the capacity to believe. And we see that when we look at the section on taqwa, right? And the blameworthy trait of disbelief, and it's addressed there. Another principle, of course, is that لا تكفير باللوازم, right? Anything that entails disbelief, so it's not in itself denial of the decisive, but entails denial, would not in itself be sufficient subject for deeming a person a disbeliever. And we'll look at some examples, right? Right? Third is that, as Ibn Nujaym mentions, لا يفتى, right? بكفر مؤمن في كفره خلاف. Okay. One does not give fatwa on the disbelief of a believer if there's any difference of opinion regarding their disbelief. Right? 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 A fourth principle is that التكفير يدفع بقدر الإمكان. Right? And one avoids takfir to the extent that is possible. Right? Because and fifth, that it's مبني على الاحتياط. Right? It's based on extreme caution. And it's من أخطر الأحكام الدينية. It's of the most dangerous of the religious verdicts. So it's not, besides someone outright, and especially on deeming a specific person a kafir, right? So someone said, I'm not a believer, right? We say that statement would be kufr, but we would not call the person a kafir, because they might mean I'm not a real believer. I'm not a believer as believers should be, etc. Right? But they're told you cannot say things like that, right? And in an age where ignorant, and both ignorance of religion, weakness of faith, and confusion, all three of these things are so rampant, it requires even more caution, right? Okay. So he says, قال الإمام البرغوي رحمه الله تعالى قال في التتارخانية من قال بحدوث صفة من صفات الله تعالى فهو كافر. That whoever says that any of Allah's attributes is originated is a disbeliever, right? Because anything that is originated is in need of an originator, right? And Allah is eternal, and none of His essential attributes could possibly be originated. Because if Allah's essential attributes were originated, then attributes are inseparable from the entity they're an attribute of. That would entail that the divine entity is originated, and that would be absurd. Again, the same principles apply, right? But someone says something like that, then we just say they're confused. They don't know what they're talking about. وفيها سئل عن قوم ذات باري حل يعني عن قوم يعني قالت and this is والعياذ بالله ذات الباري جلت قدرته محل الحوادث Miko Wind, right? That he asked that some people say that Allah Most High's entity has is a locus point for originated things. ما حكمهم قال كافر شند. He said in answering that they are بشك, that they are they become disbelievers without doubt, right? I.e., this thing that they've said is disbelief, right? وفيها سئل عن من قال بأن الله تعالى عالم بذاته ولا يقول له علم قادر بذاته ولا يقول له قدرة وهم المعتزلة هل يحكم بكفرهم أم لا؟ قال يحكم لأنهم ينفون الصفات ومن نفى الصفات فهو كافر. Okay? And in it he was asked that if some people say that Allah Most High has knowledge, but by His entity itself, not by an attribute called knowledge. And that He is powerful by His own entity, but He does not have an attribute called power. And this is the belief of the Mu'tazila. In the Fatawa Tatarkhaniya it says, he is a disbeliever without. He is a disbeliever without doubt. He's a disbeliever. Again, as the commentator makes clear, the relied upon position is that this is from the errors of the Mu'tazila, and it's really more than misguidance. It's from their stubbornness, right? Because one who is powerful, who is powerful, you would describe them as having power. One who has knowledge, who's knowledgeable, one who knows, you'd say they have the attribute of knowledge. Say no, he knows, but he doesn't have an attribute called knowledge. And that's a strange opinion to take, but it is not disbelief, right? Because they do affirm that Allah knows. They do affirm that Allah wills. They do affirm that Allah is powerful. But they say, but He does not have an attribute called knowledge or will or power. So that's an error. So they deny the sifat al-ma'ani, they deny the affirmative attributes, but they do affirm the attributes of affirmation, right? His being, knowing, willing, powerful, hearing, seeing, speaking, etc. It's an error, but it's not disbelief, according to the relied upon position. Again, this is an example of the books of Fatawa mentioning something being disbelief because its consequence is disbelief, which is because it would entail denying attributes. But they don't deny the quality itself. They just deny the name. It's an error, but it's not. Okay. وفيها إن اعتقد أن الله تعالى أن لله تعالى رجلا وهي الجارحة يكفر. If someone believes that Allah Most High has a leg that is the limb, this is disbelief. And again, because it entails affirming that Allah is a body, which in turn entails neediness, originatedness, and other qualities that are directly observed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are bid'ah fil i'tiqad, these are matters of innovation, and it's sinful to hold such beliefs, but it does not take someone out of the fold of Islam. وفيها ومن قال بأن الله تعالى جسم لا كالأجسام فهو مبتدع وليس بكافر. And if someone says Allah Most High is a body but not like bodies, of course this is a major sin. They're an innovator, right? In beliefs. An innovation in belief is worse than outward sins. But they're not a disbeliever. وفيها ومن قال إن الله تعالى عالم في السماء إن أراد به المكان كفر. If someone, also in the Fatawa Tatarkhaniya, if someone says Allah Most High knows in the heaven, in the sky, if they mean in a place, that this is disbelief. And again, because it entails disbelief, it's not in itself disbelief. It'd be a bid'ah in aqidah, but would not take someone out of the fold of Islam. وإن أراد به مجرد الحكاية عما في ظاهر الأخبار لا يكفر. And if they were just relating what is in the outward purport of certain texts, then it is not disbelief. Right? Like Allah Most High is saying, أَأَمِنْتُم مَّن فِي السَّمَاءِ, are you safe from the one in the heavens? Right? وَإِن لَّمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ نِيَّةٌ يَكْفُرُ عِنْدَ أَكْثَرِهِمْ. And if someone says something like this without intention, this is kufr, according to most of them. Again, same thing. Right? 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 And وفي التحبير, right? وهو الأصح وعليه الفتوى. So this, in the tahbir, it's that this is most correct and the fatwa is on this. Right? But then if you look at the commentary, he mentions the principle. Right? قال في تنوير الأبصار, Murtashi mentioned in تنوير الأبصار لا يفتى بتكفير مسلم أمكن حمل كلامه على محمل حسن. Fatwa is never given on deeming a Muslim to be a disbeliever if it is possible to interpret their words with a good meaning, with a sound interpretation. أو كان في كفره خلاف, or if there is difference of opinion about their disbelief. ولو رواية ضعيفة, even if it be a weak narration. Right? And in the important work Jami' al-Fusulayn, it quotes Imam al-Tahawi, Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, that one does not give one لا يكفر مسلم ما لم يتيقن الردة. A Muslim is not deemed لا يكفر مسلم. Okay? A Muslim is not deemed kafir as long as one is not sure of their apostasy, is not certain of their apostasy. إذ الإسلام ثابت لا يزول بالشك. It should say ثابت. Right? It should be a ba. Do you have a ba? لأن الإسلام الثابت, because Islam that is established, لا يزول بالشك. Right? And there's some really important quotes. You should make a and he quotes right a number of the important resources of Ahl Sunnah. Amongst them, he quotes Sharif al-Jurjani, Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani, when who's commenting on the Mawqif of al-Iji, that basically the criteria is that whoever denies something necessarily known to be of the religion, man ankara ma'luman min ad-din bid-darura, someone who did, there must be denial and that what is being denied is necessarily known to be of the religion, something decisively established, not differed upon, and known as such by not just the learned, but even the common person. Right? And there's some good quotes here. Right? And Jalaluddin Duwani quotes from the beginning of Sharh al-Mawaqif, أن جميع ما كفر به الفقهاء راجع إلى ما ذكر. That all the things that the fuqaha have mentioned as kufr, right, goes back to this, right? Right. So basically, it's used out of, practically, it's considered like a warning. It's like tahdhir. And that's from the usage of the Arabs, right? The Arabs would refer, and you can see that. So, because A is B has a number of other interpretations. Like you say, such and such thing is kufr. It can mean A equals B, but it can be A entails B. Right? A yalzam minhu kufr. Right? So A is B could mean A equals B, or A entails B, or A is like B in terms of its gravity. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, العهد بيننا وبينهم الصلاة فمن تركها فقد كفر. The Prophet ﷺ said, the covenant between us and them is the prayer, so whoever leaves it has indeed disbelieved. Does that make them kafir? No. It's not A equals B. Leaving prayer does not equal disbelief, but it can lead to disbelief, either by the progressive weakening of faith until no faith remains, and then they just leave it, or that if you leave something enough, eventually you may start denying its obligation, and then it would lead to disbelief, or that it is only becoming a disbeliever, etc. Right? And there's many other examples of that in prophetic usage as well. Okay, so this section here, this is worth getting. There's some good, right? وفيها right? In the Tatarkhani, لو قال نا مكاني زتو خالي نا تو در هيج مكاني فهذا كفر. That if he says that there is no place, and addressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there is no place free of you, and nor are you in any one place. This is disbelief, right? If you say that, oh Allah, you are in every place and not just in one place, right? And again, this is right? Right? That this is very problematic, because we believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists beyond place, right? Right? But the commentator says, but one would not make some a kafir, because we would give it an interpretation that the person says, oh Allah, you are in every place. That's wrong. We say, no, Allah is to be beyond praise, but meaning that your power sustains all things in all places, right, etc. Right? وفيها رجل قال علم خدا درهم مكاني هست, that the knowledge of Allah is present in every place. هذا خطأ, so this is an error. Now the fuqaha who deem these things kufr are not speaking out of a vacuum. They're not sort of, foaming at the mouth, tripping you up on a technicality, but the human being is meant to be a rational animal. That's how Allah has honored the human being. Revelation addresses ذوي العقول السليمة, those of sound intellects. Revelation has come with dilalat. The revelation has come in language, right? And the meanings of words are considered according to sound, their sound indications. Just as moral responsibility is established upon the servant by both the expression, indication, allusion, and implication of texts and their levels of indication, as mentioned in the works of usul. Likewise, the servant is responsible for their actions and their words in both what they affirm and what they indicate. Right? And that, if that applies to commercial transactions, right? That, let's say, two people differ. So, after Zubair and Zubaydah got divorced, Zubaydah goes to Zubair's cafe. She didn't realize it was Zubair's cafe. It's called Ziz. So she said, well, my name is Zubaydah. She goes to the cafe, and there's Zubair. So she sits drinking a coffee. Zubair comes and said, you bought a cake, but you have to pay for it. She doesn't answer him on that, but she says, make sure there are 2 cherries on it. The implication, legally, but then she denies she got the cake. Her saying, put 2 cherries on it, is an acceptance of the fact that she bought the cake. Unless, witnesses would bear witness that she is clearly mocking him or something, right? So if we were to apply the dilalat, right, the indications of words in what they affirm, indicate, allude, entail, imply, etc., then these statements should be kufr, and many actions could be kufr, as we will see. So they're not speaking from a vacuum, right? And they're not just saying, okay, whatever is kufr, right? The fuqaha are being precise and careful. But that's what the words affirm or entail. But there is a overburdening caution, and that's what caution entails from one direction. Then there's an overburdening caution, which is that people make mistakes, right? And Allah is merciful. Inna rahmati tasbiqu ghadabi. So they use the caution of what the words affirm, indicate, or entail to tell people, keep away from these words and keep away from those actions. But at the same time, in giving fatwa, they won't actually give fatwa on that. Right? So this is an important point, right? And Imam al-Khadimi spends a lot of time thinking through this, throughout this commentary. And then he says, وَفِي النِّصَابِ, and this is an important book of Hanafi usul, of Hanafi legal rulings related to public morality and personal morality. نصاب الاحتساب, it's an important source for al-Birgivi, and it's published. He says, وَالصَّوَابُ أَنْ يَقُولْ كُلُّ شَيْءٍ مَعْلُومٌ لِلَّهِ. The right thing to say is that everything is known by Allah, not that Allah's knowledge is everywhere. وَفِيهَا رَجُلٌ وَصَفَ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى بِالْفَوْقِ أو بِالتَّحْتِ فَهَذَا التَّشْبِيهُ وَكُفْرٌ. And in it, a person who describes Allah Most High as being above or below, this is comparing Allah to His creation, and this is kufr, right? And Imam al-Tahawi puts it so powerfully in the Tahawiyya. Says, وَمَنْ أَثْبَتَ لِلَّهِ مَعْنًا مِنْ مَعَانِ الْبَشَرِ فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. Whoever affirms for Allah any of the meanings of human beings has committed disbelief, but doesn't mean that they're kafir. Again, this is because it would entail all kinds of things, right? وفيها, and in it, رجل قال يجوز أن يفعل الله تعالى فعلا لا حكمة فيه يكفر لأنه وصف الله تعالى بالسفه. And in it, that if a person describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying that it is possible for Allah to do something, to do an action bereft of wisdom, this is disbelief, because they have described Allah's actions as being fickle or idle or foolish. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ وَهُوَ كُفْرٌ. And that's disbelief. And but rather that all divine actions have wisdom. How we conceive of divine wisdom, the mainstream schools of Islamic law between the Maturidis and the Ash'aris, they've differed on its conceptualization. But and we've addressed that previously. وفيها لو قال خداي بود وهيج نبود, right? That that Allah was and there was nothing. وباشد وهيج نباشد, right? That Allah was and there was nothing there, and there is nothing, right? And there is nothing else in existence. فقد قيل الشطر الثاني من كلام الملاحدة. And it's said that the second part, that nothing else exists, is from the statements of the malahida, of those who don't believe in religion, right? Like some of the philosophers who denied existence. فإن ظنهم أن الجنة وما فيها من الحور العين للفناء, because they and this includes the Ismailis, that even heaven and what is in it of rewards like the maidens of paradise will all perish. كفر عند بعض المشايخ. Some scholars said that this belief makes someone a kafir, that nothing exists besides Allah. وخطأ عظيم, and a tremendous error عند البعض, and a tremendous error according to others, right? And it depends what they affirm, right? Many of the Imams of spirituality quote the hadith that كان Allah, and the narration that became famous is كان الله ولا شيء معه, right? And you can see There's other narrations that are more, which are the more rigorously established, like كان الله ولم يكن شيء غيره, etc. كان الله ولا شيء معه. And they add وهو الآن كما عليه كان, and he is now as he ever was. Right? Right? That absolute existence belongs only to Allah. In comparison to absolute necessary existence, al-wujub, al-wujud, al-wajib, al-mutlaq, contingent, dependent, needy, perishing, sustained existence there's no point of comparison. Right? But they're not denying that things are, that the contingent existence, right? Al-wujud al-mumkin. They don't denying that it is, but particularly for the purpose of realigning people's consciousness, they did not deem it to merit the name wujud. So right? The same scholars, if they explain Aqidah, they'd explain it as the ulama of Aqidah refer to it. That is wujud, there's al-wujud al-wajib, there's necessary existence, and there's contingent existence, al-wujud al-mumkin. But for the purpose of cultivating spiritual consciousness, they referred to contingent, possible, dependent existence as thubut, as that which is affirmed. Right? So Ibn Ata'illah in his Hikam says, الأكوان ثابتة بإثباته ممحوة بأحدية ذاته. That the created world is affirmed, right, by his affirming it. But before his absolute oneness is completely effaced. Right? And the people of the spiritual path have used different terminology. That terminology is not a theology, but it is a way of realigning one's consciousness. And the ulama of the greatest of the imams of theology and the greatest imams of spirituality have mentioned that there's no difference between what the theologians say on this and what the imams of the spiritual path say, because they are ultimately capturing on one level the form of what the Prophet ﷺ has come with, and the other is the reality of what the Prophet ﷺ has come with. والله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم وحسبنا ونعم الوكيل. وفيها من أنكر القيامة أو الجنة أو النار أو الميزان أو الحساب أو الصراط أو المصاحف المكتوبة فيها أعمال العباد يكفر. Right? And in it, that anyone who denies the day of resurrection, or paradise, or the fire, or the scales, or the judgment, or the bridge over hell, or the books of deeds, right, in which the recording angels record the actions of the servants, commits disbelief, because these are all decisively established beliefs. Unless someone were ignorant and then they were told about these things. Right? 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 Unless someone was ignorant, it's conceivable, especially about some of the... It is possible that someone never heard about the scales on the Day of Judgment. It's possible that someone doesn't know that there's a bridge over hell. If someone just entered Islam, it's possible that they don't even know about heaven. Right? So let's say, Zayn's walking down the street. and he's checking his phone because the missus is messaging, and there's this non-Muslim guy who is walking with a cake. They bump into each other, and accidentally, the non-Muslim guy, in self-defense, hits the cake into Hafiz Zain Saab's face. So as he wipes the face, the person saying sorry, he uses the opportunity to هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله. He calls him to Allah. And as he tells him about Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, he accepts it all. He says, I believe. La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. Now life makes sense. Now the heavens and the earth, and he's looking around. But Zayn continued as he was wiping the cream of the strawberry cake away from himself, said, and we also believe in the day of resurrection. And the guy was looking up in the sky and gets run over by a delivery truck. Last words were, what is the day of resurrection? And he didn't believe in it yet. Is he a kafir? No. Because it's jahl. Right? So there's lam yatimma inkaruhu. Right? He did not deny it. There's a difference between takdeeb, denial, and adamul iman, and non-belief. Right? Some details, they could be a state of non-belief arising out of ignorance. But someone, beyond La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, is it conceivable that, especially in times like ours of ignorance, someone might not know that angels exist? Yes. Now there's a difference between non-belief and disbelief. Right? And that's why, we've mentioned before, the 6 levels of, the 6 categories of belief mentioned by some of the great scholars like Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Ghursi, hafidhahullah, about that, right? Okay, وفيها من قال إن الميزان عبارة عن العدل فقط ولا يكون الميزان يوزن به فهو مبتدع. If someone says that the scales on the day of resurrection are an expression of justice only, meaning there is not an actual scale in which actions are measured, is an innovator. وَلَيْسَ بِكَافِرٍ. Because scales are frequently used as a metaphor for justice. It's a conceivable metaphor, but the basis is, and what is indicated by supporting evidences, is the scale is very much a physical scale, whose details we don't know. Which is why actually there are, and there has been minority khilaf amongst the Salaf regarding it. And if you look at some of the larger tafasir, when they talk about al-Mizan, they mention the khilaf, and it's weak. It's weak. And some of those words of the Salaf can be interpreted, right? Because when they say, al-Mizanu huwa al-adl, right? That the scales are justice, that can be A is B, can mean al-Mizanu huwa lil-adl. They're not denying that the scale is real, they're just saying, even if you say, innama al-Mizanu huwa al-adl, that the scales are just, are only for justice, that is not denying that there are scales and they're for justice. Right? But so it's muhtamil. But this is, given there being sufficient confusing element, it does not make someone an outright kafir. وَمَنْ أَنْكَرَ شَفَاعَةَ الشَّافِعِينَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ. And whoever denies the intercession of those who will intercede on the day of judgment is a kafir, because they're denying a Quranic verse. لا تنفعهم شفاعة الشافعين. But again, someone may well be unaware of the shafa'ah. Right? So he quotes at-Taftazani that the hadiths from shafa'ah are mutawatir, are mass transmitted in meaning. However, given the outward purport of certain verses that deny the efficacy of intercession before God, which are understood, all of them, intercession without his permission would mean that the person would not be deemed kafir. They're just confused and misguided, okay, which is bad enough, right? Right? وفيها من قال بتخليد أصحاب الكبائر في النار فهو مبتدع. And in it, in the same work, it's come that whoever says that those who commit major sins, the kaba'ir, it will be eternally in the fire, and this is the position of some of the Mu'tazila, فهو مبتدع, they're an innovator, but not a kafir. Because the outward purport of some texts do appear to indicate permanent punishment, but that permanent punishment, when you consider all the texts together, they're khalidin, dwelling therein permanently, is understood to be for a long time, right? Like وَمَنْ يَقْتُلْ مُؤْمِنًا مُتَعَمِّدًا فَجَزَاؤُهُ جهنم خالدا فيها, right? Dwelling therein, but dwelling therein forever, but khulud can also mean for a long time. But if you piece the evidences together, as the Sunni mainstream does, and that's one of the ways that people go astray, is that they hold fast to some texts and not others, right? As you see from the Muqaddimat of Imam al-Sanusi, of the asbab, of the causes of disbelief, one of them is holding fast to the outward purport of some texts and not considering all the texts together and how they fit according to the principles of sound interpretation. Okay. وَفِيهَا لَوْ أَنْكَرَ رُؤْيَةَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى بَعْدَ الدُّخُولِ فِي الْجَنَّةِ يَكْفُرُ. And in it, if someone denies the beholding of Allah Most High after entering paradise, disbelieves, because it's established by the Quran and the Sunnah, and by consensus before difference of opinion arose about this. This is what mentioned by Taftazani in Sharh al-Aqaid, as the commentator mentions. However, right, again, this is a matter of that relates to innovation, that even though the إثبات الرؤية ثابت بالتواتر, but there's a shubha, right? There's a shubha. So the Mu'tazil, there's an argument. We say it's not a sound argument, but that shubhatul dalil, as Ibn Abdin and before him many others mentioned, shubhatul dalil takfi fi daf'i takfir, right? That a line of argument that the weak is not completely without any consideration, right, is sufficient to ward off disbelief, right? And the Mu'tazila have their arguments about the issue of not beholding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. It's wrong. It goes against the outward purport of the Quran, mutawatir hadiths of the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but we do not deem them kafir for that, but it's innovation, right? right? So they say that, they interpreted it in a whole number of different ways, and that's comes up in other works of Aqidah, etc. And we talked about the divine vision earlier in the text as well, right? So the same principle applies, right? وَكَذَا لَوْ قَالَ لَا أَعْرِفُ عَذَابَ الْقَبْرِ فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ. And likewise, if someone says, I don't know whether the punishment of the grave is real, is a kafir, and the majority position is that denying the punishment of the grave is bid'ah, right? Is bid'ah, right? وفيها يجب إكفار القدرية, right? Right? And in it that it's necessary to deem as disbelievers the Qadariyya, those who say that the servant creates their own actions, etc. They're and there's a number of groups, that with similar but slightly differing beliefs that were the Qadariyya, and the Prophet ﷺ warned about them in authentic hadiths. That's the amazing thing, of many amazing things about them. And they're also, after the Mu'tazila emerged, because they're those who had these beliefs before the Mu'tazila, and then post-Mu'tazila, a subset of the Mu'tazila were given that title as well, right? So, في نفيهم كون الشر بتقدير الله تعالى, insofar as they deny that evil is destined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And the relied upon position is that no, because they say, they affirm al-quwwatul muda'a. They affirm that it is بِقُوَّةٍ أَوْدَعَهَا اللَّهُ فِي الْأَشْيَاءِ, right? They say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, the servant creates their own actions, but Allah placed that ability in the servant. So that's innovation. What does he say in the Kharida? What does he say? وَمَنْ يَقُلْ بِالطَّبْعِ وَمَنْ يَقُلْ بِالطَّبْعِ Good. Right, very good. Right? So whoever affirms this, the idea of al-quwwat al-muda'a, that yes, the servant creates their own actions. So the evil is created by the servant, but by a power Allah created in them. That is innovation. It's not disbelief. But they ascribe it ultimately to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The difference between them and the the hadith comes that they're the majus of this ummah. Right? They're like the Magians of this ummah, but they're like the Magians, right, in what their belief would entail. وَفِي دَعْوَاهُمْ أَنَّ كُلَّ فَاعِلٍ خَالِقٌ فِعْلَ نَفْسِ, and in their claim that every actor, every morally responsible actor, creates their own actions. Right? But they affirm the quwwat al-muda'a. So again, right? And that is not so, and that's why they, in general, the ulama wrote books for the ulama, right? And there's different books that are suitable for different levels of people, and that's the right? And they say يعني they say that الكتب خزائن ولكن لها مغاليق ومفاتيحها عند أهلها وهم العلماء. That books are like treasure chests, but the treasure chests have locks, and the keys to those locks are with the ulama. Right? Otherwise, there's things that are, and that's why it's very important that as one studies, one finds things, one goes, asks the scholars, this is what I found, what do you have to, how is this understood? And that kind of connection is very, very important. Right? It says, but it's so clear. Yeah. Is it al-Tarqaniyya a reliable book? Yes, but doesn't mean everything in it is correct. Or that everything in it is as you understood it. Who gave you a certificate of ultimate understanding? Right? Because otherwise, if you took that, then we can say, and if you can selectively just read anything in the Quran, you know, if you remove one hamza, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks, ilahun ma'allah, is there a God besides Allah? You remove that, then it would say there's a logic, there's an affirmation that ilahun ma'allah, that there is a God besides Allah. No, you missed something before. You missed a hamza. Right? That does the Quran affirm that Fir'aun's the greatest of lords? No. He said that and he's being castigated. So there's cases of obvious misunderstanding, but there's subtle misunderstandings that are just as possible. So the books of fiqh are like that as well. وَفِيهَا, and in it, يَجِبُ إِكْفَارُ السَّكِسَانِيَّةِ, right? That it's necessary to deem a group called the al-Kisaniyya. That's what it's called. Al-Kisaniyya, right? في إجازتهم البداء على الله تعالى, in their saying that it is possible for Allah to come into existence, right? And this is a deviated sect, of course. And he says, وَيَجِبُ إِكْفَارُ الرَّوَافِضِ فِي قَوْلِهِمْ بِرَجْعِ الْأَمْوَاتِ إِلَى الدُّنْيَا. So it's necessary to deem the Rawafid, disbelievers, because of their saying that the dead can return to life. Right? بِتَنَاسُخِ الْأَرْوَاحِ, through and they're affirming reincarnation, right? وانتقال روح الإله إلى الأئمة, and that the soul of God itself transferred to their imams, right? So firstly, وأن الأئمة آلهة. So there are sects, just as from within Sunni Islam, there are sects that deviated. Some of them became innovators, some of them deviated further, and they fell into denying that which is necessarily known to be of the religion. So those who denied that which is necessarily known to be of the religion would go from truth to innovation to disbelief. Likewise, the sects outside the mainstream, the starting assumption of them is that they have innovation in their beliefs, they're mubtadi'ah. But anyone, whether their starting point is Ahl Sunnah or their starting point is that they're one of the sects, anybody who denies and remains in denial of something necessarily known to be of the religion, something decisively established, without difference and without shubha, known both to the learned and the ignorant, they commit that takes them out of the fold of Islam. But this is the most dangerous of rulings. It's not made. We cannot take rulings, right? Ar-Rawafid, the al here is at best understood referentially, that those Rawafid who affirm these matters, right? And which is those who fulfill the criteria, not, right? And there, and here Rajab Effendi mentioned some interesting details, and but or that the imams are gods. That's not the mainstream belief of the Rawafid, right? وبقولهم بخروج إمام باطن, or they're saying that the hidden imam will emerge in itself as unestablished, as we would affirm that belief. The fact that someone could live long and come back and just re-emerge is not inherently kufr, right? وتعطيلهم الأمر والنهي, and they're negating commands and prohibition إلى أن يخرج الإمام الباطن, until the hidden imam comes out, right? وبقولهم أن إن جبريل والعياذ بالله غلط في الوحي إلى سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وحاشا دون علي ibn Abi Talib, that Jibril erred and sent the revelation to Ali, to the Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, rather than Sayyidina Ali, and that is, that is not a mainstream belief of the Rafidi sect. Right? But if there are those who affirm that, then that's a separate matter, right? And their state is so obvious, don't even need to comment on it. وهؤلاء القوم خارجون عن ملة الإسلام وأحكامهم أحكام المرتدين, and such people are outside the fold of Islam, and the rulings are like the rulings of apostates. ويجب إكفار الخوارج, right? And the Kharijites are deemed disbelievers. Again, as Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib said, إخواننا طغوا علينا, right? 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 And there's some useful details in the commentary. You can look at them, right? في إكفارهم جميع الأمة, because they deem the whole ummah to be kafir, right? Meaning everyone but them. وفي إكفارهم علي ibn Abi Talib, and in their deeming Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, وعثمان بن عفان وطلحة والزبير وعائشة رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين, and deeming these other noble companions to be disbelievers. Now, that is an error and misguidance, etc., but that's not in itself outright disbelief. ويجب إكفار اليزيدية, and it's necessary to deem the Yazidis kafir. Again, not the case. Now, there's a number of sects in Islamic history that have been referred to as Yazidis, right? في انتظارهم في انتظار نبي من العجم ينسخ ملة سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم, and they're waiting for a non-Arab prophet who will abrogate the religion of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم again, right? ويجب إكفار النجارية في نفيهم صفات الله تعالى وفي قولهم إن القرآن جسم إذا كتب وعرض إذا قرئ, and necessary to deem the Najaris to be disbelievers. Right? This is a historical sect similar to the Mu'tazila and some of their beliefs. Again, not outright kuffar, who said some strange things. I don't want to even read it. وفيها, and in the Tatarkhani as well, واختلف الناس في إكفار المجبرة. The people differed on deeming the determinists kafir. Now, there are three levels of jabr, right? three levels of determinism. One, the fact that is there qada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is there divine decree of things? Yes. So insofar as there's divine decree, and that nothing is outside divine decree, that is, in that sense, things are determined. But then Ahl Sunnah would say, yes, things are determined, but the human being is not compelled, right? But rather, they act out of choice. So, the Ahl al-Jabr, the people, the determinists would be those who would actually refer to the human being as that al-abdu, they will just say al-abdu mujbar, the servant is compelled. Then there are two categories of such people. The Jabriya, those who say الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ بِالْجَبْرِ, those who affirm Jabr, they're of two types. Those who say, yes, it stops on what? Very simple. If someone affirms, they say, you can say whatever. You can say that the human being is a pink elephant. Is he morally responsible? Yes. Khalas. Tawakkal ala Allah. Right? 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 Because if you say that you're morally responsible, that do you believe that you have to believe in God? Yes. Do you believe that you have to pray? Yes. Do you believe that you must fast? Yes. تحل الحلال تحرم الحرام نعم خلاص. So you just say confused. Right? That's one of the big historical arguments. Right? So the Jabriya have a whole range of beliefs fall under that category. Right? The specific historical arguments are historical arguments. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ أَكْفَرَهُمْ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ أَبَى إِكْفَارَهُم. Some ulama deemed them kafir, others did not. وَالصَّوَابِ إِكْفَارُ مَنْ لَمْ يَرَى لِلْعَبْدِ فِعْلًا أَصْلًا. And then the Tatarkhani says the sound opinion is to deem as disbelievers those who don't say that the servant has no actions. Rather, we'd say that the hadd of takfir would be inkar at-taklif, say there's no moral responsibility. But even if they say there's no moral responsibility, so what do you mean by that? So do you need to pray? Right? Because they could be confused and they could mean other things. But statements like that are problematic. So those who say it's kufr, it means that these are dangerous, problematic beliefs. ويجب إكفار معمر في قوله إن الإنسان غير الجسد. So it's necessary to deem Ma'mar, who's of the Qadariyya, kafir. He's long gone, don't worry about him. That the human being is not the body. Right? Right? So what is the human being? There's some interesting discussions here. You just make a note of it. Right? Don't worry too much about it. ويجب إكفار قوم من المعتزلة بقولهم إن الله تعالى لا يرى شيئا ولا يرى. And it's necessary to deem a subset of the Mu'tazila as disbelievers who say that Allah does not see anything and He is not seen. Right? And ويجب إكفار الشيطانية or al-Tariq, right? And it's probably more correct to say necessary to deem the sect that is Shaytaniyya or Shaytan al-Tariq, who a strange sect في قولهم إن الله تعالى لا يعلم الأشياء إلا إذا أراده لا يعلم شيئا إلا إذا أراده وقدره. And they're saying that Allah does not know anything unless He wills it and destines it. Right? And shockingly, in our community here in Toronto, someone noteworthy actually said something similar to this, trying to argue that, well, no, we believe in moral responsibility, and they got themselves into funny knots. So they said, no, because they say if God knows everything eternally, then there's no human responsibility. They fell into all kinds of philosophical traps, ended up saying absurd things because they didn't learn properly. And he says, وَأَمَّا صِنْفُ الْقَادِرِيَّةِ الَّذِينَ يردون العلم فكذلك عندنا وتفسير رد العلم أنهم يقولون إن الله تعالى يعلم كل شيء عند كونه وكذلك كل شيء يكون عند كونه أما الشيء الذي لم يكن فإنه لا يعلمه الله حتى يكون فهؤلاء كفار لا نتزوج من نسائهم ولا نزوجهم. Right? So, as for those who say that knowledge goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's what we say. However, if they say that Allah Most High knows things when they happen, and the things that don't happen, and that things are only destined as they happen. As for the things that don't happen, then Allah doesn't know about them. Then those are disbelief because they're denying divine knowledge and destiny. And such people are not to be married. وَلَا نَتْبَعُ جَنَازَتَهُم. And we don't follow their janazah. And أما المرجئة فإن ضربا منهم يقولون نرجئ أمر المؤمنين والكافرين إلى الله تعالى. As for the murji'ah, right? Which are those say things are up to Allah, right? Right? And these are a sect. Again, there's mild irja, moderate irja, and radical irja. Right? Right? So, one category of the murji'ah say that the affairs of the believers and the disbelievers return to Allah Most High. Right? Right? Whereas we say no. Ultimately, the believers are in paradise, and the disbelievers, whom the message reached at the very least, are in hell. فيقولون الأمر فيهم مفوض إلى الله تعالى, and they say their affairs are consigned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يغفر لمن يشاء من المؤمنين, He'll forgive whomever He wills of the believers. And He'll forgive whoever He wills of the disbelievers. وَيُعَذِّبْ مَنْ يَشَاء, and He'll punish whomever He wills of the believers or the disbelievers. وَيَقُولُونَ لَهُ تَعَالَى الْآخِرَةِ وَالْأُولَى, and that it's up to Allah in the end and in the beginning. كما نرى يعذب من يشاء من المؤمنين في الدنيا وينعم من يشاء من الكافرين. That just as we see that Allah punishes whoever He wills of the believers in this life, and He grants blessings to whoever He wants of the disbelievers in the next, same thing could happen in the next life, right? وَذَلِكَ عَدْلٌ, and they say then that's justice. فَكَذَلِكَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ, that the same thing could happen in the next life. That just confused belief. فَيُسَوُّونَ حُكْمَ الْآخِرَةِ وَالْأُولَى, and they deem that the state of the next life is like this life. فَهَؤُلَاء فهؤلاء ضرب من المرجئة وهم كفار. This kind of category of the murji'ah, that everything is up to Allah in the hereafter, and that, so then they're denying the things that are, فريق في الجنة وفريق في السعير, right? They're denying, إن للمتقين مفازة, right? And زمر وسيق الذين اتقوا وسيق الذين كفروا, like all these verses, there's a big problem, right? وكذلك الضرب الآخر منهم الذين يقولون حسناتنا مقبولة وسيئاتنا مغفورة, right? And there's another category of them who says, look, our good deeds are all accepted and our bad deeds are all forgiven. والأعمال ليست بفرائض, that actions are not obligatory. ولا يقرون بفرائض الصلاة والزكاة والصيام وسائر الفرائض. And they say that the obligatory acts of fasting and zakat and charit and hajj, etc., all of these are not required. ويقولون هذه فضائل, that these are good things to do. من عمل بها فحسن, whoever does them it's good. ومن لم يعمل فلا شيء عليه, whoever doesn't, there's nothing wrong with it. فهؤلاء أيضا كفار. These are also disbelievers. Why? They're denying things that are necessarily known to be of the religion. However, this term murji'ah is used in other ways, right? So there are extreme murji'ah, but there's moderate murji'ah. الذين يقولون لا نتولى المؤمنين المذنبين ولا نبرأ منهم فهؤلاء المبتدعة. Says we don't ascribe ourselves to the believers who are sinners, and we also don't cut ourselves off them. These are innovators, right? ولا نخرجهم ببدعتهم من الإيمان إلى الكفر. But we don't deem them through this innovation, right, to go out from the fold of belief to disbelief. Right? So that's just a strange belief, right? That we disassociate with them, but we don't deem them kafir. That this is innovation. This is not what the Prophet ﷺ said. أما المرجئة الذين يقولون نرجئ أمر المؤمنين إلى الله تعالى فلا ننزلهم جنة ولا نارا ولا نتبرأ منهم ونتولاهم في الدين فهم على السنة. As for those who consign, they say we consign matters to Allah, but they mean that we consign the affairs of the believers to Allah, such that we don't deem them for sure to be in paradise, because it is possible that their state change. But we do not disassociate from them, but rather we deem ourselves to be, we have, we are allied with the believers, right? We are allied with the believers. We have, insofar as we are co-religionists. This is the sunnah, right? Because most people are not free of sin. وَمَنْ يَتُبْ وَمَنْ يَمُتْ وَلَمْ يَتُبْ مِنْ ذَنْبِهِ, right? فَأَمْرُهُ مُفَوَّضٌ لِرَبِّهِ. Whoever dies unrepentant of their sin, their affair returns to Allah. Allah could punish them, He could forgive them. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِيمِ وَالْخَوَاتِيمُ مَجْهُولَةٌ. Actions are by their endings, and endings are unknown. Right, so this statement, this kind of irja, he says, فَلْزَمْ قَوْلَهُمْ. So hold fast to this, this position. Right? Every believer, وَالنُّصْحِ لِكُلِّ مُؤْمِنٍ, right? As the bay'ah of the Prophet ﷺ was, and that we have sincere concern for the good of every believer. وَأَمَّا الْخَوَارِجِ, as for the Khawarij, literalist sect, pietistic, deemed sinners to be disbelievers or questionable, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَرُدَّ فَمَنْ لَمْ يَرُدَّ قَوْلُهُ فَمَنْ لَمْ يرد قولهم شيئا من كتاب الله تعالى وكان خطأهم على وجه التأويل. Those of the Khawarij whose statements don't go explicitly against something of the Book of Allah Most High, and their errors are in interpretation. يتأولون أن الأعمال إيمان يقولون إن الصلاة إيمان وكذلك الصوم والزكاة وكذلك جميع الفرائض والطاعات. And those who say that the prayer is faith, and fasting is faith, and zakat is faith, and likewise all the obligations and acts of obedience are faith. فمن أتى بالإيمان بالله تعالى وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر وجميع الطاعات فهو مؤمن، ومن ترك شيئا من الطاعات كفر. ويقولون الزاني يكفر حين يزني وشارب الخمر يكفر حين يشرب الخمر. وكذا يقولون في جميع ما نهى الله تعالى عنه يكفرون الناس بترك العمل، فهؤلاء تأولوا وأخطأوا فهم مبتدعة. فإياك وقولهم، منصوب على التحذير. ولا تقل بقولهم واجتنبهم واحذرهم وفارقهم وخالفهم. Right? So then the Khawarij, you can see some pietistic tendencies in our time. So they say that whoever believes in Allah and the angels and His books and His messengers and the last day and does all the acts of obedience, they're the believer. And whoever leaves anything of the acts of obedience has committed disbelief. And they say that the one who commits zina falls into disbelief when they're committing zina. And whoever drinks alcohol has committed disbelief when they're drinking alcohol. And likewise with all the things that Allah Most High has prohibited. So they deem people, meaning they deem believers, to be disbelievers because they left some of the prescribed actions. So these people interpreted and erred in their interpretation. So they are innovators, right? So he says, so beware of what they say, and don't say what they say, and keep away from them, and be wary of them, and part with them, and differ with them. Right? And then he says, وَأَمَّا مَنْ لَمْ يَرَى الْمَسْحَ عَلَى الْخُفَّيْنِ فَقَدْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّةِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم فَهُوَ عِنْدَنَا مُبْتَدِعٌ. He says, as for one who does not deem it permissible to wipe over hoofs, over footgear, has turned away from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, so they are an innovator, right? Because it's something clearly established. فَلَا تَتَّخِذْهُ إِمَامًا فِي صَلَاتِكَ اخْتِيارًا. So don't take such a person as your imam in the prayer out of choice. وَلَا تُوَقِّرْهُ, and don't respect them. وَلَا تَخْتَلِفْ إِلَيْهِ, and don't keep the company of an innovator. فَإِنَّهُ صَاحِبُ بِدْعَةٍ, because they're an innovator. انتهى. And this ends the quote from the Tatarkhaniya. Right? So he quotes by saying, right? And of course, so this needed a lot of contextualization, right? If we were doing a mukhtasar of the Tariqa al-Muhammadiyya, or right? We would leave the whole quote out. But also, these serve as warning that look, there are a lot of strange beliefs out. What's the purpose of quoting something like this? And Imam al-Birgivi is not just he's a great educator. And if you look at how carefully he structured his books, why does he have this long quote here? To say that even in his time, right, this Ottoman times, the zuhur of Islam, etc., but just as there's a lot of corruption in actions, there's all kinds of weird beliefs out there. be wary and be careful. Right? Be wary and be careful. So he says in closing advice, and then we'll close, فَعَلَيْكَ أَيُّهَا السَّالِكِ. So it is upon you, O seeker, O you who seek to know Allah and His attributes according to the way of the Sunnah, بِالْجِدْ, to have striving, وَالتَّشْمِيرِ, and to literally roll up your sleeves, to strive, to hasten, في تحصيل اليقين, in attaining certitude, بمذهب أهل السنة والجماعة, with the way of the Sunni mainstream and the way of the Sunnah and mainstream, والإذعان له, and to submit to it, وغاية التيقظ والتنبه, and to be very wakeful and to be very wary, to be very aware, والتضرع, and to beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, والاستعانة بالله تعالى, and to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's assistance, حتى لا تزل قدمك, until your feet do not err, ولا تزول, and not depart, يعني ولا يزول اعتقادك, and your beliefs not go away, بإضلال مضل, by the misguiding of a misguider, وتشكيك مشكك, and by the doubt, the sowing of doubts of those who sow doubts. Right? فإني قد سمعت, for indeed I have heard, عن بعض متصوفة زماننا, of some of the claimants to tasawwuf of our times, and he himself believes in the way of mainstream spirituality, but he has no patience for what Imam Zayd calls the goofy Sufis, right? The mutasawwifa, and some people refer to them as the mustawsifa, right? حكى عن شيخه, right? Who relates from his so-called Shaykh, أن واحدا من أقربائه يرى الله تعالى كل يوم مرة أو مرتين, that one of his close relatives sees Allah once or twice, meaning physically, a day. وأن موسى عليه السلام مع كونه كليم الله تعالى لم يتيسر له ذلك, and that Musa عليه السلام, despite being the one addressed by God, did not attain that. وقيل له, and this person was asked, then Sayyidina, and it was said to him, Allah said to Musa alayhi salam, لن تراني, you shall not behold me. وهذا الكلام ربما يسمعه الغافل, and such statements may be heard by someone ignorant, بغتة, suddenly, فيظن أنه صحيح, and they may think it's correct. Oh, mashallah, look, he looks so munawwar and whatever, and the guy just never leaves home, so it's pale. أو يشك, or someone may doubt. وهذا تفضيل لغير النبي على سيدنا موسى عليه السلام بل على جميع الأنبياء. And such a statement would entail saying that other than a prophet is better than Sayyidina Musa and better than all the prophets. فإن رؤية الله تعالى أعلى المراتب, because beholding Allah Most High is the highest of ranks. وَلَمْ يَتَيَسَّرْ لِأَحَدٍ فِي الدُّنْيَا, and it was not attained by any in this world. سِوَى نَبِيِّنَا Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, except for our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. في ليلة الإسراء, on the night of the Isra. وَقَدْ اخْتُلِفَ فِيهِ, and even this there's difference about, and we've seen the difference, and most said that it took place. Right? And there's اختلاف about it. Right? He mentions it again here. وقد عرفت فيما سبق أن اعتقاد أهل السنة والجماعة أن المولى عفوا أن الولي لا يبلغ درجة النبي. And we've seen that the belief with certitude of Ahl Sunnah is that no righteous servant of God can reach the same rank as a prophet. Right? فضلا عن أن يتجاوزها, let alone go beyond it. Right? And there's some good discussions here in the commentary. So here, we have one more class, inshallah, in which we'll look at some of these closing investigations. بإذن الله تعالى, regarding the rank of the prophets and an important caution. And there's something useful coming up in the commentary, which Imam al-Khadimi summarizes. It's almost like a treatise, micro treatise, the issues where there's difference within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. There's many people who wrote important works related to that, but this is a useful source as well for that, but we'll come to that. The main thing today is to appreciate that many of the statements where the ulama say such and such thing is kufr, such and such thing is kufr, it's not to be taken at face value, but the issue needs to be understood. But there's a purpose to it of warning and to be very careful about guarding one's beliefs from any kind of erroneous understanding, and to root it in sound, pure, deep knowledge, grounded in taking the science of certitude from the people of sound beliefs and from the people of certitude. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.